Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected, brought to you by Stone Road. As always, we like to talk about things related to crisis management, disaster recovery, business continuity, COVID, anything that can help you prepare, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. As you might tell if you're watching on YouTube, that it's that time again. I'd like to welcome back for our January talk, Regina Phelps. Regina, welcome back.
Alex, Happy New Year. It's so good to see you.
Happy New Year to you. And you're out in California. I just want to make sure everyone knows you are safe, considering all the headlines we've seen lately.
We have had torrential downpours, but in a drought state, we're very happy to have them. So even though it's been tough, but yes, we're doing fine. Thank you for asking.
Great. And this is our first show of 2023, our first update. And I looked it up today. This is episode, I guess you can call these episodes with us, between you and I, number 34, believe it or not.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Do you remember I talked to you more than I talked to my husband.
Remember when we started, we thought this would only be, a couple of months.
Well, you thought that, but the pandemic planner and me thought this would go on forever.
Yeah, you have that background. You would know. Well, I never thought, 34 months later, we'd still be doing this.
I know.
Talking about some of the same things. And we're going to touch on a little bit of that. And we're going to try and finish a topic we started a while back, but we didn't get very far into.
Right. We're going to do better. We're going to do better. So all of your listeners, don't worry. We're going to be much more disciplined, aren't we?
Okay, sure. So why don't we just jump right in and start talking where we are with COVID and the pandemic.
Great. Super. I'm going to share my screen because I have a deck of slides, as I often do. And what I'm going to talk about initially is I want to talk just about where we are. So just as Alex was saying, we're going to do a very quick overview of what was happening with COVID, really quick. And then we're going to try and finish what I started it was November, which is the individual and societal impacts of the pandemic, and really drill down into two things that really directly impact our profession, which is the human impacts of COVID and also the future of work. I just want to mention where we are as far as in the United States and what's happening with the subvariants, which, as you know, has become an alphabet soup for sure. And now we're still having all of these different variations of Omicron. And as you can see from this particular slide, the current subvariant that is just ripping through the US and many parts of the world is XBB.1.5, which actually is a variation of the Omicron variant, BA2, and it actually hails out of Singapore. If you look at the slide, you can see that it started actually here in the United States very slowly at the very beginning of December, but you can see it has rapidly gained steam. It's the purple, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's the purple vertical line. And as you can see now, it is really ripping through the US. And so it's making up at least 50% of all cases. And very, very quickly, it'll probably completely dominate the United States. It is just as infectious as measles. So that's infectious, right? And so that's become an issue. As far as our COVID case count, we have a very high plateau that we have landed on here in the US, with about 40,000 people in the US in hospitals for COVID, and about 5,000 of those are in ICUs. In November, when I gave the same update, it was about 20,000 people in the hospital and about 3,000 people in ICUs. So that's a big bump up. And our current death toll is averaging about 500 people a day dying of COVID-19 in the United States. However, this has become really a disease of people that are older. So if you're 65 and older in particular, if you have any comorbidities, you are the ones that we're seeing hospitalized now, and you are the ones that we are seeing dying. So lots of cases. Of course, the case counts don't mean anything anymore because there's very few people getting PCR tested, but we are having still a significant impact in hospitals and in deaths. Now, in your lovely, here's a slide for you to speak to, if you'd like to, Alex.
Yeah, I thought this was a interesting slide because the picture you took is actually from the Government of Canada website.
That's right.
Health Canada. I was on there this morning, and when you sent your slides, I went, "Wait a minute, I've seen that before." And I
Right.
went to your deck and went, "Oh, I know where she's got this."
Right. You guys are
But
still having a lot of BA5 though, so you're,
yeah,
behind where we were, right?
yeah. Well, usually what happens is even with COVID, we're not far behind you. Anything that
Right.
happens to you eventually happens to us. And let's face it, we've got open borders now,
Right.
so we know something's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's heading our way. The A couple of quick updates, though, that in the local area where I live, the few cities, they are reporting that over the last week, some of their what they are able to count as cases are heading down.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people that are, and I know quite a few that have actually had COVID in the last little while, most of them are not taking tests anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is taking a test, one, because they're hard to get to. And if they, or try to find, I should say, and if they're trying to get to a hospital or a clinic to find out if they've got COVID, they're telling them to stay away anyway.
Right.
So people are just saying, fine, I think I've got COVID, I'm staying home. If I get really bad, then I'm going to emergency.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise people are just staying home. But the radio was announcing that some of the counts are going down. The hospitalizations were heading down a little bit.
Good.
That's just our area. So, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to keep my fingers crossed that that continues. I am seeing an uptick in people wearing masks now.
Ah, that's
Where for
great.
it's not a large uptick, but when I was out a little while ago on the weekend, I noticed that, oh, you might have seen one or two people in this grocery store wearing masks. Now I'm seeing about 20 or 30.
That's great.
And so I'm like, okay, well, that's a good sign. And I think this, the XBB variant is, and what we're seeing in the news now is creating that. So I'm hoping that continues,
Mm-hmm.
'cause that's hopefully how we'll be able to fight it,
Yeah. Yep.
and
Yep. Yep. I just was visiting some family in Los Angeles over the weekend and flew down there. And my husband and I were the only masked persons as far as the eye could see in the airport. That was a little discouraging, but
yeah,
oh well.
yeah.
Oh well. Okay. Well then, so that's good. So it sounds like things are doing well in Canada. So let's dig in and talk about what we're going to talk about here today. So in our last episode, which was in November, we talked about kind of the overview of what's happening globally as far as the impacts of the pandemic. So as we talked about, most people are over this, and really, unless you're probably above the age of 60, most people aren't doing much to protect themselves. But there are very long-term implications to a pandemic, and I shared that in our last November series. So if you want to go back and pick that up on YouTube, I really talked about the history of pandemics, and I looked at basically back to 432 BC. There are lots and lots of data about pandemics and the long-term impacts. And so today I'm going to really focus initially on these individual and societal impacts of COVID-19. So there are 5 things that we have seen with COVID-19, which also historically pans out with all the other pandemics, but I want to emphasize these in particular. The first is a major decline in trust of expertise, both knowledge, education, and experience. So just because you might have a baccalaureate or master's degree or a PhD, or you're a physician or any highly educated person, that does not mean that the public will trust you. And we have certainly seen that with people refuting medical advice during the pandemic, but also refuting all kinds of other advice. And so why I think it's important as you're listening to me and our dialogue back and forth between Alex today, I want you to think about how this will impact you as a continuity professional and working in resiliency, to be able to do your work, understanding that people may not necessarily trust your knowledge, which is kind of scary when you begin to think
Yeah.
about that, right? So there's a general decline in overall trust. There's also a general decline in the trust of people universally, where people are more suspicious. People are more concerned about just keeping it close within their own group, let's say. And we certainly see that here in the States. Do you see that in Canada as well?
Yep. Yeah, we see it but amongst our own political parties or special interest groups or
Mhm.
anybody that doesn't agree with someone right off the bat. They don't trust it. And to the first point you said, it doesn't matter if you're a clinical doctor or nurse that's been around for 30, 40 years. It makes no difference.
Right.
They just don't trust you because they see things or read things on social media, and people don't know what to believe is true anymore. So if you can't figure that out, don't trust anybody.
Right. And that's a huge impact for democracies, right?
Yeah.
There's been a huge issue in inequalities really being exacerbated. So you see that with the rise in anti-Semitism. You see that in the rise of race-related issues in many parts of the world, and certainly in the United States. You see that with LGBTQ folks. There's a whole kind of issue related to inequality and people that are lower income. It's really been an issue. We certainly saw that in the United States, but you've seen that throughout the world. And certainly we've had political divisions. Oh my gosh, our country is just ripped to shreds. And we're not the only one where there's increasing division politically, and where it becomes even a hot button in your work environment and the people that you work with. So that's another real significant major issue. But then the biggest one that has really, I think, will be with us for a very long time and has huge ramifications to both democracies, the way governments work, but the way businesses work, and to some extent, even the kind of work that we might be doing. And that is this rise of misinformation and even worse, disinformation. So to give you just a definition so we're on the same page here, misinformation is false information that's out there. But disinformation is information that is purposely misleading, and it's biased, and it basically allows you to manipulate the story. And it's really what we used to call propaganda. And there's so much of that, so much of that. And again, when you're thinking about how you communicate what you do, how you engage your audiences and resiliency, we need to be thinking about these types of issues. Now, you might say, well, Regina, that's crazy because you're talking about the pandemic and now you're sort of tying it back to the work we do. That's part of our concern, right? That's part of our issues, is that we have to be seen as a reliable messenger. We have to be a trusted messenger. And we need to understand that there's lots of things going on that are not necessarily in our best interest. There's also 5 specific global disruptions that are going on, as well as these individual ones that I've mentioned. Certainly financial hardships. Now, here in the US, we have been talking about really high inflation compared to historically. It's about a significant over a 20-year high. But compared to other countries, we actually look like pikers in some ways. I mean, there's inflation as high as 100% in Argentina, but around the world, inflation is really problematic. And also there are things such as the fear of recession and actual recessions occurring in many countries. There's a lot of discussions about recessions here in the United States, but again, that's a problem as well. But then also what you're seeing is that in poorer countries, they're also getting a decrease in foreign aid, which is impacting them even further. So financially, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of hardship around the world. There's incredible global instability. Probably the most instability that I've had that I can think of in my adult life. I grew up, of course, in the Cold War, which was the last time that was really felt as it is today, but a tremendous amount of global insecurity, which then makes it very difficult for us in our work, but also in countries as well. I'm designing right now probably 5 or 6 exercises related to the Russia conflict with Ukraine and the impact in Europe, but also China and Taiwan, because a lot of companies are really concerned about what would happen if either one of those particular situations escalate. There's a lot of food insecurity. A lot of that happens to be because of the Ukraine grain embargoes. Ukraine is one of the greatest grain baskets in the world, but so is Russia. And so there are a lot of countries, especially in Africa, that are facing famine because that grain is not getting out and actually being able to provide food for so many. And the supply chain disruptions, how many times have we talked about that? Oh my gosh, in the last 3 years, Alex, it's been nonstop. But it's still happening. And of course, with the COVID meltdown in China, which we did not discuss, but is certainly widely in the news, that they're not doing lockdowns anymore, but people are sick and dying and dropping like flies. So there are still supply chain issues because of that. And then lastly, there's been an increase in crime globally. Global gangs, global ransomware attacks. There's a lot of people taking advantage of all of this uncertainty in the world. And all of these things really play into the kind of work that we do. So when you think about resiliency, it's not just about what's happening at the individual level, but it's really the global level. And we in our field have to be looking at these things and be aware of them all the time.
Sometimes the scope is kind of hard to grasp
Oh my
because
gosh.
there is so much. There's the saying, what is it? Think globally, act locally.
Yep.
I think that's it. So you're focusing on your own little area, your own fiefdom, your
Right.
sphere of influence, trying to get that right. But meanwhile, everything around you is still going crazy, and it's got to be really tough to wrap your head around sometimes.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Is this a good time for a break, Alex?
Actually, I was going to say that. Let's take a break now because I know you're going to start on a new subject. And believe it or not, we'll actually be at the 16-minute mark. I don't think that ever happens to us. So we're going to take a break. We're talking with Regina Phelps today, and we will be right back. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.